On May 6, 2013, police in Cleveland uncovered a living nightmare that had been hidden behind the front door of 2200 East 55th Street for 12 long years, revealing 3 women who had endured a decade of captivity, abuse, and forced isolation. The discovery sent shockwaves through a city still reeling from its own history of industrial decline, and it thrust an ordinary suburban home into the grim spotlight of one of America's most disturbing kidnapping cases. Ariel Castro, a 44-year-old former construction foreman, was not a stranger to the neighborhoods that surrounded his modest 2-story house. Born in Puerto Rico and raised in a modest Cleveland family, he had married, divorced, and remarried, working odd jobs that kept him on the periphery of the city's working-class community. In the early 2000s, after a failed marriage and a string of small-scale scams, Castro moved into the house that would become his private prison, a place where the line between ordinary suburban life and unspeakable horror would blur. The first victim, Michelle Knight, vanished from her apartment in February 2002, after a brief encounter with a man who promised to help her find a job. In a matter of days, she found herself locked inside Castro's basement, stripped of her name, her identity, and any hope of escape. Over a year later, in April 2004, 26-year-old Amanda Berry walked home from a night shift at a local restaurant, only to be snatched by a man who offered a ride and then thrust her into the same dim, windowless rooms. The third captive, 20-year-old Gina DeJesus, was abducted in August 2004 after a night out with friends. She, too, was forced into the same subterranean cell, her youthful optimism crushed under the weight of fear and manipulation. For years, the women existed in a warped reality where daylight was a rumor, meals were rationed, and every moment was punctuated by the constant, low hum of Castro's control. He kept them chained to a steel frame, stripped them of personal belongings, and forced them to work as domestic servants, cleaning, cooking, and even raising a child that he had forced Amanda Berry to bear. The house itself became a maze of locked doors, barred windows, and a basement that smelled of mildew and desperation. Yet, through whispered conversations and the occasional chance to glance at a cracked mirror, the 3 women forged a fragile bond, sharing stories and small comforts that helped sustain them through the unthinkable. The world would not learn of their ordeal until a desperate call for help pierced the darkness. On the night of May 6, 2013, a neighbor, hearing a muffled scream from the house's back door, called 911. Amanda Berry, bruised and trembling, managed to unlock a side door and sprint into the night, shouting for help. Police officers swarmed the residence, discovering a basement that resembled a tomb. The 3 women, gaunt, covered in bruises and clinging to each other, were finally free. Their rescue sparked a national outcry, and the faces of Castro's captives quickly became symbols of resilience and the hidden horrors that can lurk behind familiar doors. The investigation that followed unraveled the extent of Castro's depravity. Evidence recovered from the house, handwritten journals, surveillance footage, and a cache of photographs documenting the women's daily lives, painted a portrait of a man who meticulously planned each abduction, who used charm and intimidation to control his victims, and who showed no remorse for his crimes. In an interview with the Cleveland police, a detective described Castro's methodical, almost clinical approach to kidnapping, noting how he would scout potential victims, lure them with promises of employment or rides, and then transport them to his home before sealing them inside his basement for years. Castro's trial began in early 2014, a courtroom filled with reporters, family members, and the weight of a city's collective grief. He entered a plea of not guilty, claiming that the women had been volunteers and that he had merely provided shelter. The prosecution, however, laid out a mountain of damning evidence. Forensic DNA linking Castro to each victim, the testimonies of the women themselves who described in harrowing detail the beatings, the sexual assaults, and the psychological torment they endured, and the physical scars that matched the timeline of their captivity. The trial's turning point arrived when Amanda Berry took the stand, her voice steady yet trembling as she recounted the moment she heard a neighbor's scream and the fear that still lingered when she stepped into the light after 12 years. Her words, echoed by Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus, left the courtroom in stunned silence. The jury, after less than 12 hours of deliberation, found Ariel Castro guilty on all counts: kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder, though he would not face a murder charge because his victims survived. On July 3, 2014, a Cleveland judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for each count, ensuring that he would never again step foot outside a prison wall. The aftermath of Castro's conviction rippled far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The three women, though freed, faced a daunting road to recovery. With the support of a community that rallied around them, they began to rebuild shattered lives. Amanda Berry, now a mother of two, became an advocate for missing persons, speaking at national conferences and pushing for legislation that would improve the response to abduction cases. Subscribe to The Verdict for more stories like this.